So, good afternoon, everybody. This is Adrian. Of course, I am with the Honorable, the mighty Natasha Taylor. Why am I saying table? I'm getting tongue tied. How you doing, Tash?
I am good by God's grace. I am good.
Good, good, good. All right. Well, we just wanted to do a slight discussion for the people this afternoon, or you can watch this at any time, and if it makes sense to you, please share this, and we're gonna see how many people we can actually help as we do this. Because as we do this, none of us are experts on this because we're all growing as we do this. None of us claim the title of expertise, but we are two growing leaders that are interested in helping people and helping people to reform and build and grow. But to this afternoon's discussion, we're going to talk about uh, what is it? Couples in quarantine. All right, couples in quarantine and how what they can literally do to, reignite that spark back into the relationship. And what about couples who have reached the limit, the climax, and they just will not be interested in each other anymore and would love to just say it's over. So we're going to talk a little bit about both of those issues today. Sorry, my phone is ringing off the hook. Sorry. So we're going to talk about both of those issues today on this broadcast. And again, if it makes sense to you, just share your comments, and you could reach both of us, and you can share those comments either on our Facebook pages. All right. So, Natasha, I think you got a question for me, or you want me to? How you want us to do this?
Yeah,
You want me to go, or you go?
I'll go. For me, I'm concerned about couples who are quarantined under the same roof, and they might be having um, relationship problems added to the pandemic, and they don't know how to deal with those issues. Because what happens is that before quarantine, somebody could have gone somewhere and we avoid the problem. But now that we have to be in quarantine and we're stuck with each other, so what are some of the tips you would give to people who are there and they're having marital problems, relationship problems, but they just don't know how to work it? What are some of the things that they can do?
That's a good question. Again, no expertise on this, but this is just my opinion. It's something that I apply. First and foremost, I make sure that communication is always on the high. It must be open. And when we say communication, I'm not just talking regular communication. We must be able to speak from the innermost, from the hurts, from the pains, from the truth of who you are. And even though that might upset your partner or that might upset somebody else, it is going to be the truth of who you are as an individual, and that spouse supposed to be able to know you. And you have to understand communication is a process. There's the sending, there's a sending, and then there's a lot of things between there, but it's the sending and receiving and getting that information back. But the key of that communication process returning to you, you have to be also matured enough to understand that communication is not complete until it reciprocates. So it must come back to you. So the message that you send must return to you for the communication to be complete. And that's where some people lack, because some people can, as one for a better word, some people can dish out the food, but they can't eat it. So it's a scenario they can throw this and they can really throw it hard and hurt somebody's feelings. But when it comes back to them, and the person starts to lay out the responsibilities on their behalf, sometimes in a lot of relationships, that's where the problem arises. So communication, you must be strong in that as a couple, and that's not something you build overnight. That has to happen over a period of time, over trust, over failures in your relationship, over the strengths and the weakness of the relationship, and it has to be done in an open mind. Um, we've got to have purposeful coming together as well. So things that a couple could do, like for example, there are games you can play Monopoly. If you got kids in the house, then you can play Adam and Eve Day because this is a mature conversation thing we're having. But let's say you're a single couple without kids in the house. Sometimes it's good to just play the naked game. You know, as a wife, get the naked game going on. Bake naked. Go down by that stove and suddenly you got to wipe low and you just got to, do things. Distract that brother a little bit. Turn off the TV, play some loud music, do some soca, start whining on each other, do something that stimulates something that brings it back together. You see, sometimes we could be so routinely packed that we sometimes forget how to playfully love somebody. How do I turn you on? How do I foreplay you without even not having intercourse with you? But sex must be a priority in that relationship, and you've got to find, for example, most people are quarantined to a bed. Sex is not just the bed. You can have it all over the place. Try new things. I'm talking to the people without kids. But if you do have kids, when they go to bed, do it something differently. But you've got to ignite your relationship. Your relationship, you have to understand, first and foremost, is you've got to learn to relate to your spouse. And through your toughness, through your hardship, through your trials, you've got to learn first and foremost the relating part of that, and then you can set every other thing in motion as you go along. You have to have an open mind, Natasha. This cannot be done unless the two people have open minds. And when I'm saying open minds, you cannot go into, let's say, communication that is a relationship that is going through crisis. You cannot go into that discussion with your temperament and lock it there. You've got to go into the discussion and say, okay, I'm open to hearing the things that I'm not even comfortable hearing. Because sometimes your spouse are going to they're going to be talking about things that you are not even aware exist in you. And you've got to be open enough and not be in a place where you have to defend it. Don't always go to defense. Be subjective, be open minded, be in a place where you can take a criticism, because none of us are perfect. And once we can get that right, I think we can move forward from that. And then, of course, like everything else, attitudinal change.
Let me cut you. I love that. You said so much in a nutshell. The whole aspect of communication, and whether that is in intimacy in bed, or wherever, communication is still there. And based on what I'm hearing from you, is the importance of communicating so that you can understand each other. Because I know oftentimes as couples, we communicate to respond, but we don't try to understand the other person's perspective. We don't try to grasp the other person's point of view. What exactly does he or she mean? What exactly are they saying? What is it that they want me to get? And so, what I grasp there is that there is need for us to communicate, to understand each other, and not just to respond. And then you said about the openness, because in relationship there are real issues,
Mhm.
and in that communication process, we have to be open and be willing, in our openness, to sometimes be expose ourselves, because it is a place where we will be vulnerable. It makes us vulnerable. Our flaws will surface in this communication, and then we must be willing to accept, well, this is where I need to improve. This is what I need to do right. And the other thing is, you talk about how we communicate, and you talk about speaking from the heart, because sometimes we can get very intellectual with people, and we're not hearing their heart. And sometimes in relationship, you don't need an intellectual conversation. You just want that person to hear your heart, get what I'm feeling, get what is going on the inside of me. And I think sometimes that is lacking. So if there are couples out there and they're having difficulties, I think this is so important in this process, especially if they are willing to salvage their relationships and their marriages, is that they communicate to understand each other and know that it's okay to be vulnerable, know that it's okay to accept that I don't have all the answers, I don't know everything. It's okay to accept that I have weaknesses just as much as I have strengths.
Yes, and you see, the thing is, in communication, Natasha, is a key thing you've got to learn in communication, and that's listening skills. You see, a lot of people, like you said earlier, a lot of people can hear but not listen. Listening is an art and it's a skill, and we've got to learn that. And the faster we learn how to listen, it's going to be better for us. And you see, some people are going to have a conversation, and we're going to have a conversation, and you're talking to me, and I'm going to be on my cell phone. Yeah, I'm listening to you. No, you can't be listening to me. That's not active listening. That's passive listening. And if you're going to try to resolve something, don't be passive about it. Don't have on the TV where you're going to be distracted by the television or your phone or your computer or the kids, the dog, the cat. There's nothing. You have to communicate with each other. You've got to face each other. You've got to eyeball each other. You've got to be able to eliminate all sources of distraction, and you've got to focus on each other and communicate. And when you do that effectively, then is when you can actually see change. And that can even apply for people who've reached a decision where it's over. Because
Yes.
if it's over, then you still have to communicate the process of how this is going to be over. Because your relationship is always tied to so many people. And especially if you got kids involved, you now have to communicate effectively on how you're going to make this transition easy for the family, for the children, less hurt from people outside. Because when you're going to go through, if you're going to file for a divorce are always painful things, especially for the children and so on and so forth. And what you've got to be able to do is learn how to prepare the family, the people for that transition. So that too happens, and it has to happen in respect. And it doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter how you hate each other. It doesn't matter anything of that sort. It matters that at the end of the day, you have to respect people, and you've got to be able to understand how you transition that. So it's very important through anger, frustration, and everything else. You've got to learn how to listen. And listening is the key form of that connection, because that's the way we're going to be able to smoothly decide whether we continue this or we don't.
Uh, that is so important. I was reading about problem solving skills,
Yeah,
and I came across this with various animals, and it says that the turtle method is that the turtle resolves a conflict by withdrawing into his shell.
yeah,
Uh, and that method, they said the turtle often sees that the conflict as hopeless, like it makes no point going through it. So even as you talk about the communication skill, that listening, because we communicate verbally and non-verbally, and we communicate with our action. So for those persons who choose to withdraw and hold their peace, the silent treatment, even that is a communication. You might not be saying anything verbally, but you are still communicating. And so like the turtle, you might pull into your shell and you feel as though, well, the problem is solved, but actually the problem is still there. So how does a person who has that characteristic, because we have to remember as couples that conflict is inevitable. There will always be conflict of one nature or the other. um, how does a person with that turtle characteristic address their issues in a time like this? Because how long will you withdraw? How long will you remain silent? What would you
That's
say?
a beautiful. That's beautiful because there are several types, and I like the turtle principle. But the one thing the turtle will always do, and this is where the other mature party has to do it. When the turtle withdraws, the turtle will come back out if somebody scratches its shell. So that means you have to be able to approach that withdrawn person, and you've got to be able to understand how to bring them out. So if you are together in that relationship with problem solving, first and foremost, it's a very technical thing to do, and not everybody is geared with the tools in doing it. But it's first and foremost, the first thing you need to be able to understand is who you're with, and that's why I like the Bible says, two cannot walk unless they agree. That's number one. Number two, it also says basically you need to be able to handle your spouse according to knowledge.
According to knowledge,
So
yes.
you've got to be able as an individual to know certain traits of your partner, and you've got to be able to effectively communicate to them in their language. Because a lot of times as well people don't understand this. This is every person has a love language. um
Yes.
so some people may be gifts of kindness. Some people may be quality time. Some people may be affirmation, words of affirmation. So most of the withdrawn people are affirmation people, or acts of kindness, or acts of gifts and acts of service. So maybe sometimes for them to pull out, you've got to do something, an act of their service. You've got to, and sometimes, Natasha, when we talk about relationships, you have to look at it from a perspective as a sponge. And I'm still dealing with the problem solving with the turtle, but I back it up just a little bit because when one person, and that sometimes it happens in a relationship, when one person keep giving every time it becomes too much, and that sponge eventually, if you keep squeezing it all the water out of it and not replenishing the water in the sponge, it gets dried up. And that sometimes happens with our relationship, with our love language, because people keep giving you what you need, but you haven't returned into them. So some people are empty with their love to give because they've given all that they can give to that relationship, to you as a spouse, as a partner, and there is nothing else to give. So what you've got to be able to do is reciprocate that to the person. You've got to give back. What does your partner like? Maybe they like, you can't get out there and get them roses, but how about if you just draw one? It may seem silly, but draw a rose and just put something around that rose and just say, hey, baby, when I think about you, I think about this rose. And this rose, think about the theology of how a rose is formed. The rose is not just formed like a regular plant or a tree, it must be nurtured in a particular atmosphere, environment, and soil, depending on the rose you're going to bear. So, how is your spouse? What type of rose is your spouse? And as men, we've got to learn to understand how we're going to treat that rose, because if we treat it too rough, the petals will fall. If we expose it too harshly to the sun, it will damage it. If you hold it too much, it will pierce you, because some roses come with thorns. And you've got to understand every relationship is not always going to be a smooth stem. You're going to have those thorns, but you've got to be able to understand not to draw your hand down the stem, but to hold it gingerly. And sometimes in the problem solving, we've got to take ourselves first and foremost out the picture and understand where the person is. So if the person is inside their shell, okay, do I get in there with them or do I want them out with me? And you've got to make that decision. And whichever decision you make, you've got to be the person that is going to reach out to that partner. And you've got to ask the right questions. You've got to be sometimes in a place where you don't ask questions, but you are ready to listen. You're ready to observe, because not speaking is louder than actually speaking.
Yeah.
Sometimes that could be the loudest form of communication, because when somebody is withdrawn, that's when it's going to reach the ultimate of I've had enough, this is over. And sometimes they've reached that peak or that pinnacle where enough is enough. And They're just tired and they just don't want to do this no more. And so you could reach somebody in there. You have the choice. Either go into that shell and meet them, or you can scratch that shell and make sure that when they come out, they're not met with danger, but they're met with kindness. Because if they're met with hostility, they're going to go back in. So you've got to learn how to treat those people.
I like that as in the relationship, how we must be selfless, because oftentimes in the relationship everybody is just thinking about me, myself, and I. And when we come into a relationship, it is no longer I, but it's we. And whatever I do, I must always consider that there is somebody else my actions could affect. So it's not always focusing on me, but I must always be considering what I do, how it affects that person. Which brings me, as you talk about that, to the other animal. It says the owl. The owl would confront openly, but the owl um, is fair in the process. And the owl characteristic, it places high value on the relationship and on the success of the relationship, what the goals you have. So it values the person and it values what you have together. So the owl is like a collaborator, collaborates. And in a marriage, we need collaboration. We need not be fighting each other. And many times in marriages or relationships, what we find is people are fighting for themselves rather than fighting for each other, what we
Okay.
have,
Mhm.
our legacy, our family, our children, everything. And so I think the old characteristics is one that we could adapt, where we are working together and not working against each other.
Yeah, because I was going to correct you just now. When you say you don't fight in a relationship, you're always fighting.
Yeah.
Because the one thing, and you've got to understand this as well. And if a man and a woman come together, and there's something, a principle that I live by. If you and I are together, and I still have to look at me, then you're not necessary. I'll say this one more time. If two people, a spouse, partners come together, and you still have to look at you and your needs, then there's no need for that spouse. You see, a relationship is that 100% I've got to give to you, not to me. My goal is to look after 100% of your needs. To get that, that's the owl mentality, the quality. I've got to give you 100% of your time. So I'm looking at your need and not mine. So it's in that way we reciprocate. You as my spouse reciprocate that by doing 100% of me from you. Because if you look at me and I look at you, then we're an advantage point. So our relationship, I heard the song and I love the song. By the way, Teddy Pendergrass. It's not about a 50-50 love. You see, love can be 50-50. It has to be 100% and 100%. So you've got to give me 100 and I give you 100. But we've also got to understand that within that process, we are both growing. And the growth process is going to bring change. And we have to also understand as the person grows, they may sometimes be hard to communicate to. But that's why in a relationship, you need to grow together. So what I know, I come and teach, but sometimes not everybody can teach and not everybody is teachable. But you have to find ways of how you're going to communicate what you are learning to your spouse because that's the only way you're going to grow together. If two cannot walk unless
We
we
agree.
agree. And so the high values on a relationship is pretty important. And it's always need to stay there because a relationship will not exist or survive without love, without the pure quality love of that high valued relationship. So it's time for us to actually put out the owl.
Ah, I love that you mentioned the high value. of the relationship, because the shark characteristic says that the shark method, the shark is very territorial. The shark stands its ground. The shark is forceful, and the shark is goal oriented but places low value on the relationship. And so you just mentioned the importance of placing high value on the relationship. While there are goals that we have, goals that we are driven by and we want to accomplish, we always need to consider and place that high value on the relationship. What if I have the empire, the biggest business, but then my family falls apart and my family is dysfunctional? You know, that emphasis on high value on the relationship is so important. So what would you say to whether it's the man or the woman in the relationship who is a shark, who holds out, stand the ground, and not willing to compromise or collaborate? When is it good to hold your ground in the relationship? When is it good to listen? This is non-negotiable. When would you say in relationship that is necessary? Because I know at times it is necessary to stand the ground, because there's certain things that you don't go under, period. Certain ethics remain. So what would you say in that regard?
First and foremost, on top of the ground is abuse. I put abuse as high priority. As a shark, do not tolerate abuse ever, ever, in no circumstances. So, one of the principles that I have adopted and over the years is that I will never raise my hand or my voice to my partner. And we have been able to do that successfully for several years. Because, and I'm talking even in the heat of anger, because I give you this other to add to your shark mentality. Even though the shark is territorial, the shark is one of the most distracted elements ever. Because remember, a shark responds to the scent of blood. So if this is the activity now that is happening and this has the attention of the shark, this is where the shark is going to be. If there's ever a distraction to the left or to the right, that's where the shark is going to be. So the shark is also going to be um, vulnerable
Yes.
because of the fact of it not being a long term process focused individual. So, but what you've got to be able to do, standing your ground on certain key things, you've got to be able to protect the kids at all costs. So, every discussion and anything that's happening, abuse and children, you've got to be able to protect at all costs and never compromises on those things. Never compromise on those things, sorry. You've got to be able to understand, first and foremost, you see, when you're heading into relationships, and most people have not taken the process of understanding where they're heading. So when they reach, because every relationship in the sea will reach currents, and those currents are going to pull, and that's natural. You see, the thing is, problems are great because problems are there to strengthen you. Problems are there to highlight the weakness in either one or the other partner. And the other partner, as a territorial being, need to protect and guard against. Because sometimes what we tend to do very often is have very often outside influences coming into our relationship, which makes it very dangerous. So that means you have three, four, five mixed opinions into one situation that could have been solved very easy. How could this be done? Let's say, for example, somebody get into an argument because they didn't cover the bread bowl, or they they ate and they didn't wash the dishes, because those are simple things that could cause an argument. They eat and bread fall on the ground or food fall on the ground and they forgot it, they didn't sweep it up. Next thing you see, you got roaches and those things that can trigger arguments. Simple things of walking through the house in this quarantine with your shoes on and there are kids in the house. You came home after work and you didn't take a shower. and you start lying on the bed and doing this and that, callous behaviors. So, what do you do with things like that? You have to set up landposts and remarks and reminders. So, you've got to be able to understand where you need to bring the turtle back in and where you need to be able to stand the ground as the shark, where you need to be the owl mentality and where you need to be able to just listen. We've got to fix this because of what's happening here. This is going to cause lives, and you've got to be able to be a little more responsible on X, Y, and Z. But you've got to have, and again, it comes down to the one key thing, Natasha, or the two key things: communication and listening skills. So, regardless of your territorial position on certain things, you still have to be open minded to listen to even opinions and other outside sources, the other distracting sense that's going to pull that shark. You've got to be able to listen and be ready to make changes where necessary to save the relationship if it's going to be saved.
Thank you. I believe that is awesome. For me as a woman, my I would say I stand my ground. I agree with you. Abuse, no. Infidelity, no. I stand my ground on that. Disrespect, no. I stand my ground on those things. And anything that jeopardizes my life, my health, like I can like really negotiate you putting me in that place where I become depleted because a relationship is nurturing. God never intended when God brought Eve to Adam, he said, I'm bringing you a helper. So when we come together, it is to help each other to be the best version of ourselves. Um, and that's why I don't believe that we need to step down from our standards sometimes. And I don't know, maybe you can shed some light on it. I would have heard people say that sometimes you need to step down, but there are certain things you don't step down from your values, what you stand for, because coming into a relationship, you should be coming, as you said, whole 100%. This is who I am. This is what makes me Natasha Taylor. And why should I step down from that? Why should I sell myself short? So, do you believe that when you're coming into a relationship, you should step down to reach the other person? In my in my perspective, I believe that if you know who I am and if you understand my words, why you don't come up, because come to my level. What I realized that when their sale and prices has been reduced, and we said, oh, look how they reduced that price in marketing. Whenever that happened, listen, that wholesaler, that retailer would have already made their money. They have already reached their value, their mark. And so whenever they slash the price, they are not losing. So
Never.
you as the buyer, you might think that, oh, you are gaining from them. No, they would have already acquired. So why is it in my life and my standards I need to step down or slash my value to accommodate somebody? What would you say to persons who are in that place trying to accommodate people?
Well, you use the right set of words. Try to accommodate people because it will never work. And you have to understand whenever, all right, first and foremost, again, we have to go back at the top. It's about getting into a relationship. So, most people in getting into a relationship don't get into a relationship truly understanding the depth of the world of Natasha. Go he into the world. The world, Natasha is a world in herself, and we've got to be able. That's why courting should never be a short thing. You cannot make a short term goal that is meant for long term or lifetime. And you've got to understand that my preparation, I've got to learn how to value you. So in I've got to be able to uh, I've got to be able to understand you. I've got to be able to understand how to effectively communicate with you and to you, because the effectiveness of our relationship strives on that. So if I am going to, I never, ever, ever, ever encourage anybody to drop their level. What I tell you to do is have an open mindset, but I'm never coming, I'm sorry, I'm not coming down there. Come up. Because it benefits no one when that happens. But I'm not saying to the people that you sit on your throne and you sit on high horses and this is who I am and you got, no, but a relationship is something that we work on together. So that's why I said earlier, when one person is growing, that person needs to find a way of teaching their spouse what they learned so they can grow together, they can learn together, they can value each other together. Problems are going to come. For organizations, when we do the problem solving, we use the 10-80-10 rule system, which I recently learned, or we use the organizational silo. Now, both of them are critical in problem solving. And you've got to be able to understand with the 10-80-10 rule, and it happens in relationships too. Because in the 10-80-10 rule, you've got to be able to understand how you set up your home. Which positions are your friends, which position is your family, which position is your husband, which position are your kids, where they fall. And you've got to be able to sometimes in the middle where the kids and the family fall, they sometimes will pull to either side, and you've got to be careful with it. So, but I want to go back to the analogy in which you put, and it comes down to value. If somebody values someone, they never ask that person to devalue. Because if a vase is worth $15.9 billion, how do you devalue that vase? You have to crack it. You have to break it. You have to spoil the look of it. So, in devaluing somebody or asking somebody to step off of value, is to actually crack their character, break who they are, and to dismember their belief system. So, value is something that is worth to be built on, because remember, you're not just built regularly, you are built out of. He said, let us make. So you are built with kingship, and a king does not compromise in those ways. A king sits on the throne, and a king sets his tasks high, and he has qualified people to come up to that. That's why, in every way and fashion, you have, and people mistakenly do it. People call women call their men kings, and men call their women queens, and so on and so forth, metaphorically, but they don't understand the depth in that, because the depth in that is where you put that person on the throne of your life, on the throne of your love, on the throne of your heart. And if you've called that person a king, then you cannot sabotage your king. In doing that, what you've just done is open the land for any foreigner to come in. Because once you dethrone a king, the kingdom is now without authority. And without authority, people do as they like. So it's pretty important. Sorry.
You just woo, that's a lot. Um,
Sorry.
when God said, "Let us make man in our own image and in our own likeness,"
Yeah.
and a lot of times we only see it from the perspective of the physical, this outward, and we live in a time where relationship it is very much what I call has a lot of fluff, artificial.
But
It
relationships are not physical. It's actually more spiritual than it is physical.
we are more concerned about how she look, or she has the figure, or he is cute and he wear the brand. And as you said, You talk about the value. We don't go into depth as who is he, what are the values, what is he driven by, what are his vision, what
Character.
is
Who is he?
who is the in this, what is her character, and that is absent because most time it's artificial. It's about the outward appearance, or it's about the sex appeal and all of these things. So when we come together and we are now living together, and that person begin to unveil themselves, and we are seeing who they really are, that's why we have the conflict. So I agree with you that we need to get into each other's world. And that is so important, knowing who that person is. And as you talk about calling the person king and queen, because I call my husband a king, what is challenging for me, as you said, is the importance of not dethroning that person. So I don't want to tell people who don't call your husband king or your wife queen. That the Bible says Sarah obeyed her husband and she called him her Lord.
Lord.
Um, her Lord. But Sarah knew what it is to honor him as her Lord, to submit to him, to allow him to have his role, his authority in the home, in the family. And that is key. And I find that most times in relationships, we don't get to the art of it. And that is who our spouses are, and knowing them, but we just on the outside, the outward appearance, the glamour, the glitter, and that is not who we are. So I love that. And I think a lot of the problems, we will better be able to solve problems when we have an understanding of each other. So we know what that person would do. You know what would trigger. You know what would trigger your spouse. You know when to have the avoidance theory, like the turtle, when to withdraw. You know that, listen, this is not a good time. But once we don't tap into that place of getting in depth into each other's world, we would always we will always not be able to resolve our conflicts appropriately. And that is the thing that is lacking most time. We really don't know who we are sleeping with. We undress our physical
Ah.
nature.
Mhm.
It's easier to undress and get in bed with a man. But I would avoid women say, I can't tell you that. I can't let him know this. So, and I always wonder, how could you undress your physical nakedness, but you can't undress your heart to your spouse?
Because sometimes to relationships, and you have to also understand, Natasha, sometimes men, as men, we're not matured. We could be grown up. We got some 50, 60-year-old men. We got 46. We got all sorts of fancy ages, but they're immature in their thought patterns. They're immatured in their behavior. They're immatured in the way they comprehend things. And I'm going to talk on the men's behalf, because sometimes, again, what you find in a lot of ways, you see, a lot of men don't believe in self development. We don't believe in lifting our level and standard of learning. It comes down to sometimes when I listen to some men, they, mommy got time for the banner. I got make little more. I did not hustle. The mentality. So you will find somebody 15, 16 years ago still in a hustle 15, 16 years after, because it's a hustle and they have not grown out of a hustle. So I look at somebody that I always admired even as a child, Nigel's. Nigel Supermarket started from a hustle, started in the market. Then the market hustle developed into a location. One small location when Nigel started, it wasn't the big supermarket as we knew. There were churches and other buildings and everywhere else. Nigel eventually grew and grew until he bought it out. But again, what hurt me is that that business failed. So the question came down to who failed the business. I mean, everything rises and falls in leadership, so I understand where that stopped. But at the same time, who was responsible for the business being failed? So sometimes, as men, we've got to be careful with the things that we invest in. So, as much as I'm an entrepreneur and I'm out there and I'm investing in other things and I'm doing what I'm doing, I am also taking the time to invest at home. Because in the past, in my immature days and ways that I used to do things, I would have spoilt good relationships. I would have hurt people along the way because I did not understand the balance of life and I didn't understand how to bring the investment home, how to do that effectively home to the value system that adds to send me back out. And so we've got to learn that as men. And as women, again, the Bible talks about it. A woman can build a house, but tear it down with her mouth. So sometimes you've got to have, in a lot of cases, the woman's mentality, got to use the turtle wisdom. You've got to understand when to restrain because sometimes, you see, learn the depth of this, Natasha. Most women never really see the love of their life cry on their shoulder. Rare, rarely, because most of us as men, we cry on the internal because we cannot bring it out. But when a man cries in your presence, understand what that means to you as a woman. Because a lot of women will laugh at that when a man cries. But when a man cries is a rare, rare thing. And you've got to be in a place as a woman to now nurture that because he has now made himself vulnerable and you have to guard that because you could reach two things right there. You could reach a decision where he will say it will never happen again and he will move on, or he will say, okay, she has guarded and protected my weakness part and she has strengthened me. And you will have a man that will love you for life because he is going to remember you have guarded his weakness and you've not exposed. That brings in, and that can lead to so many different things. That can lead to the scenario of Noah when the son revealed his nakedness. That can lead to so many different things because you don't want people to sell you abroad in your weaknesses. You want people to cover you in your weaknesses and build you up in your weaknesses because you have to work on your strength, not necessarily the weak, because eventually the weak will die. So
Uh,
you always marry your strength. So if I am strong in entrepreneurship, my spouse, that's where I represent my family. I might be weak in a scenario of running a house effectively. I might be weak in finances. I might be weak in choosing colors to dress myself with. Those are maybe my weaknesses, but that's your strength. And so you add to my value in that. And sometimes the relationship could be replaced where you are the entrepreneur and I am the difference. And that does not change. It goes the same way. I add to yours. So wherever you're weakened, that's where I strengthen.
I love that. And I think in resolving conflict there, we must understand that in the relationship we complement each other.
You have to.
And yeah, and the thing is also, we need to learn. I think we as women need to understand that men need to hear nice things and men need to be complimented. Men need to be celebrated, and men need to know that we are proud of them. And I know we as women, we want to collect all of these affirmations and compliments. As you talk about the man when he becomes vulnerable. So when he becomes vulnerable, if you as a woman are not mature and at a level to deal with that, you
Hmm.
can either out, as you said, you can either bring out the beast in him or the priest in him,
All right.
based on
Hmm.
you can either open a door to a healthy relationship or you close it. And oftentimes, what happens is that when men become vulnerable, we as women interpret that as weakness. And we don't know that it takes a strong man to cry before his woman and pour it out. And so, because of how I believe we were socialized to think about men, that we in our relationship can work towards men suppressing their feelings And so when they become hardcore and it comes out in other ways, we wonder why is that person like that, and not check to see how we would have contributed to that person. So when a man share his heart with you, and he might have shared bad experiences he had in a previous relationship, you don't throw that in his face when you have a problem. You don't remind him of what the woman had done to him. That is foolish.
Very.
Very foolish as a woman, that you're throwing things in the man's face what somebody had done to him, and all of that. And also, I think sometimes as women we like to say, I make you, because when I meet you, you had nothing. And I don't believe that we make anybody, but we can contribute to their, we can help in their development. But together, whenever, for me, when you are in a relationship or a marriage, when one spouse excel, both of you are excelling. That's important. That's why I don't believe in relationship there should be a competition, because we're not competing against.
No. It's a business, actually. Marriage is a business. And I think the guy that said this first was Miles Monroe. Monroe said, marriage is a business, and we need to invest in the business. Whatever is done is an investment to the business. That's why, if you look at Miles and everything that he would have done, his sons now take it over. His son now took it over. And because it was a family and he taught them, he literally poured in, and that's effective leadership. Because in leadership, when you reach certain levels in leadership, it's all about legacy, it's all about what you leave behind, it's all about you're anxious to go, because in things that you do, is you never work to stay in a position. So it's different. I work for my freedom, not to stay in a position. That's why it was easy for me when the board of directors and everything else, I said to them straight out, the managing director of the company is Caroline. So I wasn't scared to give up the post. In fact, in the company, I'm the training and development officer. I'm not secure. I'm not insecure about who I am. You give the breed to do. You got to grow, and you got to see it. You got to see it mature, and it's got to become better than you, because you are only good to your lid. And where is my lid? And I've got to be able to grow beyond that lid. So I've got to be able to now train people to be who they are, and nurture and build. And so today, tomorrow, I die, the business does not die. It goes on as a legacy. And now she can be a blessing to her children, and it can move on to generations, and that's how it happens. And if we look at this, a lot of people are not necessarily aware of, let's say, Ford company. You know, the company that Ford that makes the vehicles, Ford. A lot of people are not aware that Ford was a legacy built company. But Ford also, I mean, it got into some bad eras back in the old days, because, I'm not going to get into that here. But the same way with IBM, the same way with Macintosh, the same way. So these persons' wealth, generational success, and I'm not just talking wealth as money, because wealth is not money. But wealth, when we talk about it generationally, we talk about it from a perspective of partnerships. Wealth don't come singly. It comes through partnerships. It comes through the knitting of relationships. And you have to understand that, because the more partnerships you are in, the more successful you are. Because when you are tied to a partnership, when that partnership grows, you grow automatically. When the wealth increase in the partnership, you increase in wealth automatically. So it just becomes, sorry about that, my phone, it just becomes a natural aspect of the wealth growing process. So a relationship values on the effective partnership or partnering. You've got to be able to be wise in your partnering. And partnerships, if you look at companies, resemble companies to relationship. Partnerships don't happen overnight. You have to go through the trials. You got to prove yourself. That's why in building a long term relationship, it takes time, it takes work, and it takes almost forever because you never stop. And so, you have to court and you've got to be able to be true to the court. So the scenario is either you're going to be in this for sex or you're in this for marriage. And if you're in this for marriage, this is the long term. Are you sure that I'm the guy that you want for the rest of your life? Because I'm going to get a big belly at age 35. I'm going to start farting in the home. I'm going to walk around in my underwear. I'm going to be miserable by 45. And guess what? I'm just probably going to mess with your head by 50. Are you ready for that? And you've got to be able to bear those temperaments in mind, and you've got to be able to understand as my partner shifts, whether to be better or to be worse. Am I ready to shift with them? Because that's what relationships are. It's either a shift for the better or the worse.
Yeah, I agree with you because in relationship people grow. A relationship is not static. People grow, people
Could never be. Hmm.
change, and most times when the changes, when we see changes, we would hear spouses saying, "I didn't know you were like that. I didn't see you now. You were never like that." And we don't understand that people change. Um, Issues change them, new learning change them, there might be a new environment that changes them. There are different factors that contribute to people changing. And so that is why it is important for us to be working together, as you say, as a partnership, so that we could understand the various growth processes of each other. One of the things have been lamented, Mr. Clarke, over the years is there's a lot of focus on women empowerment. And what about men empowerment? Because women are at the universities, women are now climbing the professional ladder, women are developing themselves. They're all over. They're engineers, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're all over. Women are growing, coming out of that traditional role where women were just home makers and caregivers at home. And somebody, people often say, well, what about the men? And I want this from you as a man because I have had, I mean, I'm 42. I know some men are not teachable. I have had some relationship. Some men are not teachable. Some men don't want to empower themselves. Not that you want them to be what you are, but you want them to develop themselves according to their ability. Because the Bible said God give every man a talent. And even if you have one talent, you need to invest that and maximize on it and be the best you. So you could be the best father, the best husband, whatever, the best tailor, whatever you are. And for me, I always want to know, maybe you can tell me, what is it that prevents men or deter them from empowering themselves? Because there's a lot of say that, oh, when a woman started going to university, after university she left the man. Um, what I can say is that because life is not static, you have to, as a couple, you have to be willing to develop yourselves, i- individually and then as a couple. But what is it that you think that prevent men from empowering themselves and being the best version that God has created them to be?
Fear. That's number one. Fear factor. A man is driven on things that he can accomplish. So let's put the word pride, PRID, right? We put the word pride up there. And the P represents very boldly his proud nature as a man. So when you think of pride, you think first and foremost of my proud nature, my ego, the part of me that's my character that I cannot allow you to touch, break, chip or even probably come too close to, because this is my most protective zone. You've got to look at it from a perspective of my riches, the R. And I am exceedingly wealthy, and every wealthy person understands how to guard that wealth. So sometimes we hide the wealth, and the wealth could be not necessarily money, but could be the nurturing, could be the wealth, could be my musical ear that I can do. The wealth could be that I have the room of being an entrepreneur, but my fear, my pride, my lecture, my ego would scare me because I've seen so many failures of being an entrepreneur. It could lead to me now being insecure that if I go out there too often, my beautiful wife is going to now find a new man, and she's go. So my riches, I need to guard what I deem rich to me. Institutionalization. Whenever it comes to institutionalization and men, we try to distance ourselves from it from the word go. Because I don't want to get back into a place where you're going to lock me into one phase and I got to stay there until I die. You've got to be in a place where development becomes the fear factor again for men. Because if I develop, what am I ready to lose? So, because if you're going to move from one level to a next, you've got to be prepared to lose something. So, the sacrifice is something that cost a lot. And that's why Abraham was successful. Isaac, you've got to understand what the giftings were, what give him that. Because the thing that was providing for him the riches of it, because that was his own, that he could have said, that came from the loins of his wife. This is my gift. This is his riches. He guarded it. He never institutionalized it. But when the time comes and he had to develop himself by putting him as a sacrifice, he was ready to lay it down. And you've got to understand that education is the key to success. And most men, and I'm going to go in this direction deliberately, we've never had the model set up for us to show us that we need to move from level to level to level. If you look at society today, if we look at the prominent people, if we look at the LeBron James, we look at the Michael Jordans, we look at whomever it is that people are going to pick, tell me their educational background. But each of these men are successful financially and career wise, but their educational level is a different story. So they always hire people to cover those areas and they grow within those areas protectedly. But as men, we do not have the example of other men reading, studying. And I bring it back to home. We often tell our children we want them to be the best that they can be. Go and pick up a book and read. But none of the parents are reading in the house. So the children never see mommy picking up a book and reading, daddy picking up a book and reading. So they're not motivated to read. Reading is not the encouragement thing in the house. So when mommy and daddy is telling me to go read, reading becomes a punishment rather than a liberating thing. So what's my liberating thing? They find more things and liberating on cell phones and TVs and everything else that can move them away from education because it's not a standard that we set. And sadly, in Guyana, we see a lot of no education being the household mantra for most families. Because if you check it out generationally, we can find people who are not educated from not just this culture of this husband and wife, but from a generational perspective, checking it back from the way from their grandparents coming right up. As a young boy, no educational principle was modeled in his life. As a girl, some of it becomes different. In the old days, as a young woman, becoming a woman, the women would take you in a room and show you exactly how to model your body. Who would have done that for a man when he come of age? When a man goes into bed not matured and gets that first wet dream and wake up the next morning messed up in his underwear and don't know what just happened to him, who goes in to explain it to him? The mother would call him a nasty pervert. His sister would laugh at him, Probably even his brothers and his father would tantalize and trouble him and demoralize him as a man. So, as men, it's a fair factor of failing and failing in public. That's that's now turmoily humiliating. But we have to change it because the guy you're talking to, I'm a high school dropout, and I love telling people the story. I am a high school dropout, but I had to get back up on that boat and I have to read. There isn't a day that I do not read, Natasha. And I become better because of my ability to make conscious decisions to change. And that is what men need. And we need more models. And we need, and by way I'm talking to you, I am nowhere near perfection. I am nowhere near that. All right, but in some we have to bring that place where education becomes a style, becomes fashionable, and we've got to find women who will encourage men to make it fashionable, to wear that education, wear their failure openly and be okay with it because failure is not a negative. It's a cultural system that made it seem that it is negative. It is not. Failure is one of the most powerful, positive things that you could ever do, but only when you learn from that failure. So the one key answer to you is fear. That's what men mainly. That's I think it's the analogy in a nutshell for you.
Thank you. As you talk about reading and the whole developing of the mind, the man developing himself mentally and his capacity to reading. And I know that will go back to childhood days and all of these things
Yes.
because maybe
Generation.
culture, generation, that wasn't. In some families, education is a value. In other homes, it is not. And you talk about the men not having an example. And so we find there's a high rate of domestic violence in Guyana.
In the
Again,
world, actually, not just Guyana, in the world.
the world, when you examine those factors, it's because it would look at the man didn't had a model, or sometime his model was an abuser. So the cycle continues. What would you say to a man who all he know is to get the woman to comply, uh, is to get to become violent? Before you say, I want to say that because as a woman, I do not believe in any relationship that we are supposed to control each other. God give each and every one of us something called self-control. And when God give man dominion, it's over the birds of the air to control any dumb animals. However, God created man, Adam, the man, to provide leadership to his home, to his household, to his wife, to his children. And I think most of the times when it resorts to the violence is because we are trying to control somebody and get them to do what we perceive is the right thing to do or what we want them to do. So, what would you say to men who knows no other way or method to get a woman to comply than to resort to violence?
I could say nothing to that, brother, because there's no change that's going to happen. But I would say to men generally, when God say women are the weaker vessel, it doesn't mean lesser vessel. It doesn't necessarily match up with muscles and pectorals. It matches up with when he says that, he means that she is a gentle person. Like I explained the flower theory, she needs to be processed differently. And the control mechanism is authority. And sometimes authority can come through inferiority. So most of the times, that is an inferiority complex that man is facing. And he doesn't understand, first and foremost, who he is as an individual, and he, worse yet, don't understand and respect the value system of his spouse. Because in no way or fashion, think about it, and I go back into the royal platform. Could anybody dare raise their voice at Queen Elizabeth?
Now,
Now, then, or whenever, you are doomed for death. So, how could you then crown a king or crown a queen and then beat them? No, you can't, because that is tantamount to death. And that's why you find the law doing the same thing. Violence is zero tolerance, and you have to understand that. And I have to share this too with you as we do this, Natasha, because in a previous relationship of mine, somebody lied on me. They went as far as went to the police station, a young lady that I was seeing many years ago, and reported me as beating her. The police would know, yeah, she did it, and I'm serious about it. One of my friends heard about it and he says, "Hey, this is what this happened. This is what you need to do. Go and report yourself. This is what done." And I went and I did that. And they literally, without listening to me, they literally charged me.
wow,
And I was placed on the bench and I was there. And I was there for 4 days without food, clothing, or anything of the sort. And then they released me to go to court. When we went to court, then is when she was giggling in front of the magistrate saying, it didn't really happen. What is the damage that was done to my inner man, to my inner being? Because think about a man like me who is very popular, who is out there, now carries that stigma of an abuser that had to go to court with it. Think about, and again, who was in my corner to represent me? Where were the people then? Because the first thing a woman would say, he had this, he that. But it has to come through the process. But I'm going to talk about the people who really go through it and the men who do it. Um, there's it should never be done, and that's my just short and stop of it. It's something that irritates me. Why? Because I came up in that home. I saw my dad beat my mom. And I lived in that premise that I will never do that to a young woman. I have had relationships way back in my teens where a young woman pushed me to that limit, collared me, and I'm a very particular man with my clothes. You don't do that for ever long. I love looking neat and I love looking sharp. And she collared me in my clothes on the road because she was jealous. I just left her right. I just said, listen, we're done. We're through. That's our relationship. When she was home, that was it. I ended the relationship. Because if you're going to push me to violence, then you're not understanding my value process. And you have to, so it goes both ways. Because women can encourage and push and trigger. Because, like you said earlier, a woman should know her man, vice versa. Sometimes, not in all occasions, sometimes it could be triggers that send people there. And some women are deliberate. Some people are strategic in getting at you and they want to send a message to you that, you know what, I'm going to show you that you could be touched. So they set you up to touch them so they can touch you. It's a message. Sometimes people do things and it's and they've got to be careful with the repercussions of this, because you have to understand what it deals with a value system. Because the more a man is incarcerated or put away, it's the less value system he claims on himself, and less value system he is looked at and appreciated in the public. So we've got to be very careful with those things, and we're playing with danger as we do that, because there's zero tolerance on abuse. And I don't know how many more times I can say that. But again, abuse is something that can happen because of somebody doing it because of several different reasons, or it could be forced. But either which way, Restraint is the way to go.
I love that. Because it is said, I love that you said restraint is the way to go, because it is said that when it comes to domestic violence, it is not justifiable,
In any
period,
form or fashion.
form or fashion. But as a woman, I would like to appeal to other women,
Please.
and I try to encourage other women, um, as you talk about, not to provoke men to that place of where they would want to become. While I know that a man should never hit a woman or violently abuse a woman, I'm just saying, let us try not to add, as the old folks would say, fuel to the fire. Don't push it. Let us don't create the environment for it to happen. I always like to use the analogy of how we put bars on our windows and grills. There are grills and they're on our doors and our
Yes.
windows, and we put material things. But what are the protection we are putting on our lives? And so, if as women, if we are provoking men to become violent. We are pushing them to do things by sometimes we hit them, they're burning the clothes, they're walking out, we throw water on them. We cuss them and call them anti men, all kind of stuff. And we are literally pushing them to that place. I would want to say that then we are being foolish. That would not be foolish, because we have and should always be protecting ourselves. So if I know that this would be a trigger, then I should know to avoid that. And so,
Correct.
um, I think that sometimes the problem, we just have to go back to the turtle. You just got to know when to withdraw and pull in and let it go. It's not worth it. And then I also think that the culture where you talk about women like it. There's some women that feel that abuse is okay. Nothing is wrong if my man beat me.
You love it.
That mindset, right? And so we laugh about the makeup sex. When he beat me, the makeup sex after. I've never had one, so I can't tell you. That we And so, if we want to curb on the domestic violence level, I would want to say that the responsibility is on both person, to protect themselves and to restrain themselves from the conflict getting to that place.
But I would say once it becomes okay to start lifting voices and start defacing and denaming people, like calling people names, whores, bitch, ya, auntie man, ya this, ya. Once it starts with the verbal, it will and can move to the next level. Those are phases, signs that you can see. They're signs that people show you. I always believe in this theory that Maya Angelou said. When somebody show you who they are, believe them. They just have to show you it once. Believe them. I remember Maya Angelou wrote it as a story. She said she had a party and she invited other people into her home. And this one gentleman, very popular, she said he started talking and he cursed in her home, and she stopped the music and asked him to leave.
Wow.
Just like that. And he was her friend. She says, no, you don't do that, because when you do that, that language gets into the walls, the fabric, the area, because words are power, they're molding. And you cannot do that, because once I encourage you, my walls, my space, remember that. We don't do that here. Understand my value system. Know who I am. Respect who I am. Don't add no adjectives and preservatives to who I am. Don't nigger me and bitch this and that. Don't do those things, because when you deface people and take them out of character, out of name, you don't understand the repercussions it has as an end result. And I always remember those words, and I literally had to have it and adapt it as mantras in my personal life. And so I avoid I avoid those things. I I stay away from it like a plague.
As we wrap up, do you believe a lot of times some people when there are conflicts, all they want to hear is the spouse say, "I am sorry." For some people, "I am sorry" is a big thing. However, as a woman, while I appreciate the "I am sorry," I am more concerned about you understanding what I said and that you will work on ensuring that what created this conflict, like, okay, this is what was upsetting to me, this is what was done, this is what I didn't appreciate. I want you to understand that I would not like that to happen again. For me, having that person say I understand, and I would try my best not to do it or to let that happen again, or I would not deliberately do it again. Like those for me. But there are some people who would want to hear "I am sorry," and you can say "I am sorry" and go and do the very same thing a day after, an hour after. What are your take on that for the as we are resolving conflict? Is the "I am sorry" that necessary? What are your thoughts?
Yes and no. And again, it depends on the couple, the individuals as we do it. Because I am sorry is first and foremost a place where you're telling that person, you know what, I acknowledge that I am wrong. But sorry follows with action. It's like it has to be an action. So I am sorry for what? What are you sorry for? And then that action needs to reciprocate based on never being done again. So if I would have, I'm sorry that I fart in your presence and you didn't like it. Okay, so this is what will happen. So I am sorry I've done it. So next time I wouldn't do it again. I will move and do it and then come back. So you can actually see my actions line up with my apology. Then it makes sense. But you can't say sorry and do the same thing again. That means you're not. Like my mom always tell me, why are you saying sorry? I said, because I've done something that offends you. She says it's better never to do something to offend me in the first place. So avoid saying you're sorry by taking the time to understand the people you're dealing with and you do not deliberately offend anyone. So sometimes all we need to do is take our time to learn the partner and do the things that is necessary. And no, I sorries are going to be necessary in that. But if you have to say sorry and follow with action.
I love that.
That's my wrap.
Yeah, I love it because once you are removing something, then you need to replace it with something. So
With
if
something
you
else.
say,
Yeah,
right, if you're saying this is what uh, I don't like you doing this, then what do you like me? What would you like me to do? Because
correct.
sometimes you grow up in a child and you would hear the parents, as parents, we say, "Don't do this, don't do this." So that child grow up hearing, "Don't do this." But what is it that that child must do? So even in our relationships, when we are communicating and we're saying, "I don't appreciate this," then we need to say what we appreciate, what
Correct.
replaces that, and that is important. I can go on and on, but I know time is going. Any closing remark? This is awesome.
Yeah, I just want people to stay focused, stay dedicated, build your internal wealth. Always build the mind. Read, read, read. Have a mentor in your life or mentors. One of my first initial mentors, most people would know him, is Louis Jones, Louis and Sandra Jones. When they were they would normally come. He was one of the persons that literally started to mentor me in a lot of ways. So I have a lot of mentors in my life, but you've got to be able to understand who you are and learn from that. Because from who you are, that's another story altogether. That's another 10 days we're going to go through understanding who you are. But that's important to do. And learn to appreciate your partner. Value your spouse.
Thank you, Mr. Clarke. As we conclude, it is so important as you talk about mentors because before I got married, I have a mentor, and you happen to be one of them. But myself and my husband, we agreed to have, there are two bishops that we agreed to have. I'm Bishop Pereira, that's from Eccles Assembly, and I have my bishop, Bishop Orville Williams. We agree on having two persons. Should we reach a place in our relationship where we are having conflicts that we cannot resolve, there is these two persons that we know are going to be honest, truthful, and unbiased. That listen, we could either go to, we use two of them because if one is not available, we can reach the
Correct.
other. But that agreement that these are the person that will mentor us and counsel us whenever the need arises. And I think it is so important sometimes, doesn't matter how old we are in relationship, to have mediators and counselors and people that we could go to, especially if we seem not to be able to penetrate it and not seeing eye to eye, that there is somebody external of the relationship with the knowledge, the expertise,
That is so true.
and all the
That
skills
is so
that
true.
could help you. So I think that is so important.
Mhm.
That's important. Have a mediator, have somebody that you could talk to. So even if you're in quarantine and you're having difficulty, I trust that there's somebody that they could call and say, this is what is happening. How do I deal with this? How do we handle this? That's so important.
It is. It is. It
So
is. Yeah. Well, anyway, that's for another
thank
broadcast.
you
We can
so
get
much. This
into. Welcome, Tash. Thank you too for choosing. It's an honor.
I look forward.
Thank you much. You and your family continue to be
I
safe
thank
and
you
you
so
stay
much.
within your
Enjoy the rest
quarantine.
of your day.
You too. All right. Bye bye.
Oh yes, you too. Thanks.